faster than our usual musical meditation, but perhaps intentionally appropriate for today. How many of you have seen the 1976 film Network? Anybody? It's been a while. There's a famous scene in which a network anchor looks into the camera and tells the viewers at home, "I want you all to get up now. I want you all to get up out of your chairs, get up right now and go to your window, open it, stick your head out and yell, 'I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.' Things have got to change, but first you all have got to get mad, and then we'll figure out what to do. But first, get up out of your chairs, open your window, stick your head out, and yell, and say, 'I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.'" And remember, this is back when all people watched the news at the same time, right? So they'd be sticking their head out the window and yelling together and hearing one another. This rant earned him the nickname, the Mad Prophet of the Airwaves. And there are a lot of people in the United States today on both sides of the political spectrum who are mad as hell and who don't want to take it anymore. Not everyone, however, is angry about the same things. And I'd like to begin by inviting us to reflect on one particular cause of anger and anxiety in our country today, and then I'll widen the focus a little to consider other underlying conditions. There are a lot of theories trying to explain the cultural moment in which we find ourselves, but one of the most helpful that I've found recently is a book called The End of White Christian America. It's by Robert P. Jones. And what interests me most about his approach is that he offers more than merely his opinion. He writes from an academic, data-driven perspective based on his experience of both getting a PhD in the sociology of religion from Emory University, as well as working as the CEO of PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to conducting high-quality public opinion research. And looking back over the past few decades, Jones invites us to trace the reactions in our country to the increasingly fading influence of white Christian America. Even before the founding of our nation, white Protestant Christianity was the dominant norm, and anything else was viewed as inferior at best and deviant at worst. But as Dylan said, the times, they are a-changin'. After almost 2 centuries of white Christian dominance in America, in the 1960s, we saw serious threats to white Christian America from many different countercultural fronts. The youth movement of the hippies, the sexual revolution, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the Hispanic and Chicano movement, second wave feminism, and gay rights. But with the rise of the Christian right in the 1980s, there was this resurgence of white Christian America. But now, decades later, from our vantage point here in the year 2016, we know that major demographic changes, which include an increasing religious disaffiliation of younger generations, has pushed white Christian America toward a tipping point of losing its once unquestioned dominance. Now, before I proceed much further, I don't want to overly demonize white Christian America. I am a product of white Christian America. From South Carolina, I was raised in a southern, big steeple, Southern Baptist congregation. Beyond giving our nation a shared aesthetic, a historical framework, and a moral vocabulary, white Christian America also produced a profound amount of social capital in this country, starting, staffing, and funding a dizzying array of institutions, from churches to hospitals to social service organizations and civic organizations, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, YMCA. The YMCA is the Young Men's Christian Association, right? At the same time, we have to be honest about the ways that white Christian America was a major force in this country's history, arguing that the Bible should not only be interpreted to support slavery, but also to prevent women's rights, to prevent civil rights, to prevent equal rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens. In reflecting on the norms of white Christian America, Jones writes that questions like, so where do you go to church, felt appropriate in casual social interactions or even business exchanges. It was this presumed norm that, of course, everyone went to some church, not a synagogue, not a mosque, or not nowhere. Few gave a second thought to saying Merry Christmas to strangers in the streets, this Christian norm again, versus saying a more default thing like Happy Holidays. Sunday blue laws shuttered main streets for the Sabbath. How many of you grew up in places that had Sunday blue laws? I certainly did. Even though that's not everyone's Sabbath, even. In its heyday, a set of linked institutions reinforced white Christian America's worldview across generations. So you grow up going to the Young Men Christians Association, the YMCA, and then going to the Boy Scouts. Then you join the Masonic Lodge or the local country club with limits or even outright bans on Catholic, Jews, and ethnic minorities. White Christian America had its golden age in the 1950s after the hardship and victories of World War II and before the cultural upheavals of the 1960s. June Cleaver was its mother, Andy Griffith was its sheriff, Norman Rockwell was its artist, and Billy Graham and Norman Vincent Pearl were its ministers. We are now, however, more than halfway through the second decade of the 21st century, which I still find kind of mind-boggling. And in contrast to the formerly dominant monoculture of white Christian America, which wasn't actually a monoculture, it was just a dominant monoculture, we are well into an age that increasingly demands recognition of diversity, of pluralism, of multiculturalism. But I've taken the time to paint a picture of white Christian America to help better understand this cultural moment in which we find ourselves. To use just one of the more blatant examples, these relentless rumors that President Obama is a secret Kenyan or a secret Muslim are all dog whistles trying to otherize him as not part of white Christian America. These rumors play on fears within white Christian America that our nation's first black president, who's actually our nation's first biracial president, is not really one of us. He's not really a Christian. He wasn't even really born here, and his birth certificate is fake. Consider, for example, that in 2010, a CNN poll found that more than one quarter, around 27% of our country, harbored some doubts about the legitimacy of Obama's citizenship, of the President of the United States. That's 2010. He was inaugurated in 2009. In 2012, just before he was re-elected, ERRI found that nearly 4 in 10, nearly 39% of voters said that they did not know the president's religious affiliation. And approximately 1 in 6, 16%, reported that they thought Obama was actually a Muslim. While among white evangelical Protestant voters, the number saying Obama was a Muslim rose to nearly 1 in 4, 24%. The first African-American president, even one who is clearly a Christian, is a highly visible symbol that white Christian America's dominance is waning. And there are other less noticeable signs. In 2010, when the Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who is a white Protestant Christian, when he retired and was replaced by Elena Kagan, who is Jewish, we saw a shift to a United States Supreme Court who has not a single Protestant justice, no representative of white Christian America. The current U.S. Supreme Court has 5 Catholics and 3 Jews. And Merrick Garland, the nominee in the wings, is also Jewish. To put that into perspective, there have been a total of 12 Supreme Court justices who were Catholics in the entire 225-year history of the court. Half of those 12 currently occupy seats on the U.S. Supreme Court. Similarly, 8 Jews have served on the court, 3 of whom are sitting justices today. There's an adage that it's not paranoid if they really are after you. But here's the twist. White culture is not actually endangered. White supremacy is endangered. Christianity is not endangered. Christian supremacy is. Losing this pride of place can cause resentment and this false sense of disenfranchisement. But as you've heard me say before, loss of privilege is not the same as reverse discrimination. And what we mean by that word privilege is something at the intersection of privilege, advantage, and entitlement. That's what people are sensing this loss of. To consider some of the data on the loss of white privilege, if you go back to 1965, about 84% of this country was white. Now it's about 63%. But if you fast forward a little bit, the U.S. Census Bureau predicts that by 2042, about 26 years from now, the United States will likely no longer be a majority white nation. Relatedly, population experts forecast that by 2060, whites will see their numbers decline for the very first time in American history, while the number of people who identify as multiracial will nearly triple, and the number of Hispanics and Asians will more than double. To relatedly consider some data on the loss of Christian privilege, while white Christians remain by far the largest single segment of the American religious landscape, they have slipped below a majority to 47%. Moreover, by 2051, if current trends continue, religiously unaffiliated Americans could comprise as large a percentage of the population as Protestants, a thought that would have been unimaginable a few decades ago. Similarly, same-sex marriage being legal in all 50 states was unimaginable. I mean, I don't even have to say a few decades ago, like a decade ago. Now, for a variety of reasons, some of you may be eager to dance on the grave of white Christian America. Ding dong, white supremacy is dead. White Christian America is dead. But others of our fellow citizens, the end of white Christian America feels like a cause for lament and feels like the loss of what feels like to them as real America. The question of whether American culture has gone downhill since the 1950s divides Americans overall. A majority, 53%, still say that we've changed mostly for the worse since 1950, compared with 46% who say that America has changed mostly for the better since 1950. There are stark cleavages based on race and religion. As we noted earlier, the 1950s were a time that white Christian America retained cultural dominance, due, for example, to Jim Crow laws enforcing racial segregation. But despite that dominance, even then, there was existential anxiety about the other coming to get us. At that time, the fear was communism, and the chief fearmonger was Joseph McCarthy. These fears led white Christian America to make "In God We Trust" the official motto of the United States. That was done not in 1776, it was done in 1956. "In God We Trust" was not added onto our currency until the next year, 1957. Similarly, "Under God" was not added to the Pledge of Allegiance until 1954. But with demographic shifts, white Christian America no longer has the power to easily make such changes, especially at the federal level. So part of my intention has been to trace some of these important historical inflection points that can perhaps help illuminate what's going on in our current cultural moment, and trying to undergird that with actual demographic data. But before I move too quickly to a conclusion, I did want us to invite us to take the risk of turning the mirror back on ourselves. On one hand, it is true that many Unitarian Universalists, both historically and today, have been at the forefront of standing on the side of love, of making personal sacrifices to be on the right side of history, of helping bend the arc of the universe toward justice. On the other hand, we need to acknowledge the ways that both Unitarianism and Universalism emerged out of white Christian America. And today, Unitarian Universalism, despite our best intentions, remains in many ways a white monoculture. There is so much to celebrate about the ways that we as a larger UU movement are more aware than we have been in decades about racial injustice. And we are increasingly showing up to dismantle white supremacy, to dismantle racism. But we must continue to be intentional about building a diverse, multicultural congregation if we are going to be part of turning Dr. King's dream of the beloved community into deeds, into a reality. We must continue to practice what is sometimes called intercultural competency, the ability to move in and out of different cultural worldviews, to build bridges between cultures, to integrate cross-cultural perspectives. That's something that people of color in our country have always had to do as they navigated a dominant white culture. But now it's something we all are invited to do to become more interculturally competent. That doesn't mean getting rid of white European culture, but it does mean embracing a multicultural pluralism in which European culture is one among many other cultures that are celebrated. There's one other major piece that seems essential to me to mention. I've already laid out the ways in which I'm unsympathetic to the racist, sexist, and homophobic reactions to the end of white Christian America, because loss of privilege is not the same as reverse discrimination, as we've said. But as I reflect on the state of our country today, it seems to me that economic anxieties related to wealth inequality and income inequality are massively amplifying these pre-existing racist and sexist and homophobic reactions to the end of white Christian America. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's hard to get to those top level of the pyramid in which we're inclined and feel free and safe to self-actualize, to be our best selves, and to risk welcoming those who seem different than us, when one is worried about meeting just the basic needs for oneself, one's family, having enough food, having access to clean water, having security, safety, and a simple, decent place to live. We live in a time in which tremendous shifts are happening all around us, and our Universalist heritage challenges us to find ways of rising above the partisan divide, to do more than win in a way that leaves half the country behind. In Dr. King's words, we will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will appeal to your hearts and your conscience, and we will win you in the process, and that victory will be a double victory. There's also there are causes to fear, but there are many reasons to hope. Our fifth principle is the practice of democracy, both in our congregations and in society at large. And to authentically practice democracy, in the words of the UU activist Chris Crass, may we each do our parts in our spheres of influence for the building up of a multiracial democracy with economic, gender, and racial justice for all. Because without economic justice, without gender justice, and without racial justice, we don't actually have an authentic democracy. And as we each continue to reflect on where we are called individually and collectively to help build a world in which the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interconnection of life are at the heart of our culture, of our institutions, and of our policies, as we continue to make that discernment, what is the place in which I can act next, in which we can act next to make that a reality? I invite you to rise and body your spirit as we sing together hymn 1028, The Fire of Commitment.